Hi, Mahek. Welcome to HealthTech with Purpose.
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, Rishikesh. Yeah, great to meet you, and excited to be on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. So, where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you all from Seattle, Washington. It's not rainy for once, so it's exciting and back to summer weather.
Amazing, amazing. So, Mahek, before we start, would like to know a bit more about you, about your background. I'm sure everyone who's watching would also like to know a little more. So, maybe why not we start with that?
Yeah. Happy to kind of share a little bit about my background. So my name is Mahek. I'm CEO of DocNexus, a healthcare AI company. Prior to that, my journey into healthcare was pretty unique. I started off as an engineer, working at a chemical refinery, then ended up transitioning into working with like a lot of large aerospace, so it was like petrochemical companies, from NASA's to SpaceX's to BP, and then eventually went to Duke for my MBA, and then spent some time at Amazon in the middle of the COVID pandemic, where I helped build out some algorithms for on the retail side, and then was on AWS, most recently servicing folks across the enterprise as well as the life sciences sector.
Said, it's very interesting background, and I think it's been a while you have been in the health tech space, is it?
Yeah. I mean, I would say like the health tech space has just been, I mean, it's been something that I grew up with, like seeing my parents and family members like going to healthcare, like typically into like nurse or doctor professions. And yeah, it's been an exciting journey. I didn't really envision myself jumping into healthcare so soon, but I mean, I think COVID, seeing all of these things across the ecosystem kind of inspired me.
Awesome, awesome. So, tell us a bit more about DocNexus, and a little bit more about the company.
Yeah, so I'll actually start off with a little bit of a background of like how we even came about the idea of DocNexus, right? I mean, my background is far from healthcare. And I would say like, so myself and actually two other co-founders, we met at Duke University. We're all really excited about like starting a company, excited about the landscape of entrepreneurship. My CTO's background is very unique. He's a doctor who practiced internal medicine for about 5 years, who then worked at large pharma, who's now a full-on like front-end, back-end developer. And so he's kind of seen things from being a doctor to now being on the development side of a leading or cutting edge product. And so the way we started was actually from a problem statement. I think one of my colleagues was launching a new vaccine at a large like pharmaceutical organization. And the biggest thing that he found was getting in touch with key experts across the ecosystem was hard, right? Talking to pediatricians, talking to top virologists around the world was difficult. And so what we ended up doing was we ended up building out a web scraper, essentially over a weekend, and trying to figure out who these top virologists and pediatricians were. We showed that to the large pharmaceutical organizations and really saw some interest on that side. And so in typical Amazon fashion, we decided, okay, let's just go ahead and talk to hundreds of customers across the ecosystem, right? The Pfizers, the Mercks, the GSKs, figure out if this is actually a pain point. And since then, we basically decided, okay, let's just go ahead and quit our full-time jobs, join Techstars, and then really have been on the journey of DocNexus since then. And that's kind of like how we came up with the idea. Quickly about what we do at DocNexus, we're a healthcare AI company. What we do at the core is we help pharmaceutical and medical device companies find key experts so that they can get their products to market faster. I mean, for me growing up, one of the most important things was like spending time with family. I mean, unfortunately, my grandparents had passed away from Alzheimer's and cancer, like all other like loved ones do. And so we decided that the mission of our company is going to be simple. It's going to be, we want to go ahead and help folks bring new life-saving products to market faster. This is across pharmaceuticals or even across medical devices. And so today we're a data platform. We scour through millions of publications, trials, payments, even social media, and help to figure out who those key experts are who can join scientific advisory boards, who can run clinical trials for you as PIs, or help you do competitive due diligence as you bring that new product.
Great, amazing. And I see, DocNexus is leveraging AI, and the product is kind of uh, is built around and on top of it. So how does DocNexus leverage AI powered? Can you share a little more insight, especially to provide insights and connections in the healthcare ecosystem?
And I think the first way to think about it is in healthcare, there's so many disparate data sources, right? I mean, for someone, and I'll kind of walk you through, right? Like if you're a Pfizer or you're a Moderna, and you're trying to bring this new product to market, you have to figure out who the key experts are. In order to do that, you have to read through a ton of scientific literature, look through digital assets, and then even look through internal data. And so scientific literature could be data on PubMed, data on Google Scholar, data on data on publications that are kind of out there, as well as like clinical trials. Then moving forward into digital assets, you're looking through Twitter, LinkedIn, other data sources. And then lastly, internal data could be data on IQVIA. It could be data on your internal systems like Viva or Salesforce. And what we found is it's very difficult to kind of join all of these data sets together and create a holistic view of one person, right? And so for us, we leverage AI by creating what we call knowledge graphs. And so a knowledge graph it's just a graph where you have one node, and think of the node being a physician, right? And that node is connected obviously to other people that they engage with. But that node is also connected to every single data source or data stream that that individual has participated in, right? So if a Deepak Bhatt or a Sanjay Gupta has written publications, trials, payments, if he's like posted on Twitter, LinkedIn, if he's seen XYZ patients, we kind of take that one node as that individual, connect him with all those different data streams, and we use that to create that holistic view of that one individual. And so that's really how we're leveraging AI from our end on the knowledge graph side. In addition to that, I mean, I think the big buzzword has been like generative AI, and I think that's been taking the industry by storm. From our end, we started before a lot of even these big buzzwords were announced. And I think we really, I mean, forget about the AI. It's more so like the pain point, right? That customers face. That's really where problems emerge. And I think one problem that we saw was we had talked to folks across the large pharmaceutical sector, and one of the biggest pain points that they had was processing notes, processing conversations that they would have with these leading healthcare providers, right? You're talking to a healthcare provider and you have a massive team of 25 to 30 people. How do you figure out what's valuable and what's not valuable? And customers would generate thousands of insights per month. And so what we decided to create was a NLP engine where we would summarize text, we would extract keywords by cross-referencing it with a medical ontology, or we would enable medical search. And some of the algorithms that we've built have surpassed both Google and Facebook on that end as well.
Amazing. Yeah, and I believe I think what's critical here, and it would be great if you could put some light on it, is the whole context building, of the keywords, right? Because a certain keyword in, say, a healthcare or a life sciences industry would mean something different, in a common context. And when we are talking about AI and something which is going to search through a list of a series of data, as you mentioned, I think that plotting of that context and mapping of that context is key, right? So I think that's one of the core. I believe I won't say IP, but creating the whole context around the keywords is really important in here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, if you think about keywords and like search, right? Like the industry has kind of changed, right? And so you want to, obviously it's great to count the number of like times a symptom or a healthcare provider or healthcare organization has been mentioned. But what do you do with that, right? Like how do you take, okay, myocardial infarction has popped up 14 times in my paper. What am I supposed to do with that statistic, right? And so that's what we try to make sense of. We try to paint that broader picture of, okay, this myocardial infarction has popped up 14 times. this is what I'm going to go and do with it, right? Now I need to take action as an organization and figure out how I'm going to look at the product from a testing safety perspective, because this is going to impact millions of people long term, right? And so I think that's the light that we'd like to add to our customer base and even our algorithms.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, makes total sense, right? So, while building the whole DocNexus, as a company and as a product suite, what were some of the challenges that you faced? Like what are the things that keep you awake at night, basically?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say, right, the macroeconomic conditions are not what they used to be, I would say, compared to the last year or even a couple of years ago. Luckily and fortunately, I think like the healthcare industry is rebounding quite well as a whole. I would say some of the challenges that we saw, right? Like, I mean, coming from my background, I had never been in healthcare. Number one, I had never like built and scaled a product from 0 to 1, right? And I think for us, there was a lot of learning curves, right? With any other startup, right? You start a company and you think a product gets live in a month, 2 months, and you build MVPs quickly. When you're processing hundreds of millions of publications, trials, payments, social media, that isn't doable, right? And I think thinking with a clear head on what the long-term strategy should be from a product development side is key. Secondly, within pharma and med devices, and I mean, this is case for a lot of B2B startups that are probably out there, right? Enterprise sales cycles are not what you assume them to be, right? When I joined the Techstars program, I assumed there were going to be 2 months and you'd onboard the J&Js and the Pfizers and the Modernas of the world, right? That's not the use case, right? And I think you have to be open and really learn what your customers are asking for, right? Not truly. I think a lot of founders make the mistake of let's pitch the customer without even listening to what they want, right? And they're just pitching. And I think starting off and learning what your customers are asking for, what they're asking for, especially in this environment, is what is a lot different than what they were asking for a couple of years ago. And now you're seeing the emergence of generative AI. People are starting to get into NLP, starting to understand what AI is actually about, and try to understand that use case. I think that's the biggest thing that I've probably learned to date. And what keeps me up at night, I would say right now, is just feature development, right? I think there's so many features that customers have asked for, and we're trying to meet the needs of every single customer that's out there, right? And so that's something that I'm actively working towards.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and when you say feature development and some of the challenges, are they particularly tech challenges, like how to scale up, how to kind of deliver in time, or which tech to use kind of challenges, or more like understanding of what they're asking for and then kind of building on top of it. So just to have a little more idea.
Yeah, I would say so. They fall into two camps. The first camp is product development, right? So actually building and meeting the needs of the customer base. And as you put in product feature requests, being able to assess them and actually build. The second camp is, does that align with long-term vision, right? And so you can go down the customer rabbit hole of building something because the customers have asked for it, but that's not where you want to take this company long term, right? And so it's trying to find a balance in that road of what customers want and where we want to actually build this company, where we see ourselves in that ecosystem, right? So I think for us, that's kind of been the answer.
Great. So, where does the majority of your time go as a CEO? Because you are handling certain tech aspects as well, and at the same time trying to talk to a lot of customers, solve different scalability issues. So, where does your majority of the time go, at least in the current phase of things?
I would say, I mean, obviously, there's not like a clear-cut answer, right? It depends like week to week. To be honest, I like to spend a majority of my time on two things. It's either focus on the customer and understanding more of the use cases that are coming about, whether it's across pharma, whether it's across med device, or even across startups, right? Startups have the best ideas, and startups are typically early adopters, right? And so I'd love to focus on that side of it. The other side is also on the product, right? And I mean, as a CEO, focusing on what you're building and how you're delivering value to the customers is equally as important. And then lastly, I mean, as any other like startup that's venture backed, you also have to focus on your investors and what they're looking for. And so I would say it's kind of
Yeah.
split between those three camps. Today, it's majority on like customer, but that's kind of how I see my role.
Awesome. So in the health tech space, especially with all this tech coming up, right? What's your take on the opportunities and what are the major problems that technology is going to solve? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important question, right? And like, I think the world is still figuring out what that means. I actually just read an article yesterday on BCG talking about the highest amount of adoption across large language models today. It's probably going to be in the medtech space. They're expecting over 90% growth, 95% growth year over year, actually, just within that space. And so this could be things across research and development, could be opportunities from like marketing and sales, which we've all seen with like GPT-3 and GPT-4. It also could be involvement in like corporate functions, right? Of like generating content, automating forecasts, other things. I would say for us, like specifically, and like really where we think there's going to be further adoption, it's automation of tasks, right? And I think a lot of these tasks that are done manually today can be done like in a much more efficient way through some of the large language models that exist, right? And so I think that's the adoption. That's the thing that we're going to continue seeing. We recently talked to actually a couple of large folks across pharma, and typically, I'll just give you an example, right? Something where a large language model was very useful was today, pharmaceutical companies are talking with healthcare providers across the ecosystem, right? So a doctor has a question, they're treating their patients. They're like, okay, I'm treating them with this drug from this large pharmaceutical company. I have a question about the safety of this drug. Who do I go ask? I go and ask the pharma company. The pharma company has actually developed like AI chatbots. And so they're like, we're no longer having to talk to some of these healthcare providers for basic questions. The doctor can just come in, ask as many questions to the chatbot. The chatbot will return the answers. And so instead of waiting 2 hours, 3 hours, and having people manually search through documents and find the answer and send it to that physician, now the AI chatbot model is able to do that within seconds. And so I think we're going to see further adoption of these like chatbots across the industry. We're going to see further adoption of like even GPT-4 and GPT-3 models across the industry. And like we've seen that with like prompt engineering roles continuing to grow over time. So that's kind of my take.
Interesting. And there's a lot that has been talked about ChatGPT and the whole open AI, and as you mentioned, generative AI. So with respect to DocNexus, do you see it is more competitive, or do you see it's a piece of tech that actually can be used as a collaborative thing to do things much faster from a DocNexus perspective?
I would say, I mean, like overall, like ChatGPT, GPT-3, GPT-4, like they're all collaborative tools, right? And I think if you're not willing to embrace them, you're just going to fall behind in the world, right? And I think one of the analogies I like to think about was two moments in history, right? And everyone remembers these, like the Industrial Revolution, right? And even 2000, right? And so I think the world was very different back then, and any innovation was seen as taking away human jobs, right? And I don't think that's the case, right? We saw that with the Industrial Revolution. We saw that 2000s with computers, laptops, the growth of the internet, and we're seeing that now again in 2023, right? And so for us, we are trying to embrace GPT-3 and GPT-4 models as much as we can, right? I actually just used it 2 days ago for a very, very manual task that we had to do, where we had to scan through hundreds of thousands of different drug names, and I had to associate them to this drug is a dermatology product, this is a cardiology product, this is an oncology product. And if I had to do that, if myself and my team had to do that manually, that would have taken us not even days. This would have been weeks or months. And ChatGPT was able to do that within hours. And so I think I think leveraging some of that technology is going to be key long term. And then it's also how can you further, like we saw, and I'll give you another example. And I think everyone that's maybe a developer, whether you're in healthcare or you're not in healthcare, you saw this, right? You saw this with Copilot. Copilot was able to help across the ecosystem with helping you review code, helping you provide suggestions. And this is the same thing that GPT-3 and GPT-4 are doing, right? They're a good foundational base. They may not be the answer. And I think there's a lot of concerns that are out there today from an accuracy, data privacy, and even a compliance perspective. But it's a good foundation, right? And you can take this foundation and build upon it. And that's, at least at DocNexus, that's how we see it. From a product perspective, we can use GPT technologies to really help us grow faster, deliver value to customers better. We can also use it to train models and really build better solutions. So overall, we're trying to leverage it as much as we should, and I think that should be the case for any like emerging startup or even any large enterprise organization.
Yeah, and that's I think a very interesting and good take on it, because I mean, from a collaboration perspective, it is helping reduce weeks of efforts into days, right? So you can basically do more. It's kind of a productivity tool in a way, at least as of now.
Yeah, and there's so many, I think, like as we've seen probably even with like Y Combinator, right? Or even with Techstars or any of the other accelerators, there's so many startups that are launching every other day, leveraging generative AI. And I think a lot of these startups are going to be very important in shaping the future of what the workflow looks like, right? And the world we're heading towards, I'm not even thinking about it right now from a healthcare perspective, just from like an AI perspective. And I think one of the biggest themes and potential missions of like OpenAI, and this is something I heard from actually another podcast where Sam Altman was talking, was he wanted to create a world where everyone has an AI assistant, right? That can help them with daily tasks, from like answering phones to emails to a variety of things. And I think we're starting to develop into that world where there's like generative AI tools that are emerging, not only for like fun and pleasure, but also for corporate functions, right? Helping you optimize your financial functions or helping you optimize things across the medical affairs ecosystem. And so we're going to continue seeing that over time.
Yeah, exactly. So, what are like some of the lessons or best practices that you have learned, and from your previous experiences, that you're kind of applying in DocNexus?
Yeah, I would say so. Like my background and my experiences have spanned like from engineering to being a product manager to even working in venture. And so I've seen the other side of the table of like building a product to actually deciding of if this founder is a good founder to invest in, right? And I think now being on the other side, I'm very appreciative of having those experiences. The one thing that I kind of learned, and this may be cliche advice, but like at least from a product development side, it's very difficult to build a meaningful product that customers love, right? And I think that's where a lot of startups are trying to figure out, like, how do you find that customer love that they're excited to wake up in the middle of the day or message you in the middle of the night if there's something that's wrong with the product, right? And so I think those are the most meaningful things that I've kind of learned today of like, how do you make your customers happy is number one. Number two, it's to think about it from like a founder side, right? Being on the venture capital side, it was very easy to dismiss a startup founder because it was like, oh, they needed more traction, or they need a better go-to-market strategy, or they need to have a better product. Being on the startup side, I've realized that those things are actually very difficult to achieve, right? And especially to do that in a couple of months, that's the hardest thing, right? And so, like, the one thing that I take away, like from being a founder, is building that strategy. And like, simplest thing is OKRs and KPIs. If you're not tracking yourself from key performance indicators, you're not tracking yourself in terms of how you can improve your business across like investments, across product, or across customer every single week, you're not doing it right. And so I think that's one thing that I've really learned and really implemented across our team.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, finding a product market fit is really key, right? I mean, that's one of the important things. And as you rightly said, finding out finding out how what will make customer happy. I mean, and then kind of implementing it to that. Uh, I would say to that depth, which also helps overall everybody to grow along the journey.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, so we talked about, the whole engineering side of it, some of the challenges. But when it comes to a startup or when it comes to an organization, bringing in or cultivating a culture is really important, right? So how do you foster a culture of innovation, collaboration, at DocNexus?
Yeah. No, that's a good question, right? So we actually started during the around the COVID pandemic, right? We were born in the COVID era. And so we started as like a remote team first. And I think that's been very interesting. To be honest, we've experimented a lot, we've failed a lot, and we've learned from that, right? And I think we started off doing everyone was doing Zoom meetings, right? And you kind of figure out how do you build a culture across a team that's spread across the country, right? I'm based in the West Coast. I have a couple of teammates that are in the West Coast, and then I have some other teammates that are in Central, and some other teammates that are in East Coast. And so, how do you kind of foster that culture? That was one of the biggest things that we really questioned. It started off with let's go ahead and do once a week. Let's do a fun event where we can get the team together. Let's not discuss anything about work. Let's just play games, right? And I think that goes so far, and it really helps build that culture. But I think what's more meaningful is understanding your teammates and what they want to do, what they want to talk about, right? And listening to them. Having a meeting once a week or twice a week where you just listen and you keep it as an open forum has been instrumental in terms of our success. Today, our team actually is not only in the U.S., but we're actually in Asia Pacific and even LATAM. And so, this is as a CEO of a company whose now team is global, in a very short period of 7 months, you now have to figure out how do you make everyone facilitate, right? You have all the tools, you have Slack, you have Zoom, you have these you have share screen gaming type systems as well. But the most important thing isn't the games, it isn't the virtual piece, it's the interactions, right? And so for us, we try to meet with each other regularly. We started to do more in-person events as well. I think that builds more camaraderie long term. But for us, it's sitting down with your engineers in Latin America or in the Philippines and trying to understand what they're facing on a day-to-day basis, not from a work perspective, but also personally.
Amazing, and uh, thank you for sharing, because some of these thoughts are really interesting, especially when the team is remote, right? And you are trying to make sure that everybody kind of grows together and at the same time has same feeling of growth, same feeling of kind of being proud about what you guys are building, right? I think that's equally important, because only then the whole integrity and what I can do best for the company comes into play.
Exactly
Nice.
right. It's a hard thing to do remotely, and I don't think I have all the answers. And we're still going to be figuring it out as we go. I think that's completely okay. But I think it's putting yourself you always put yourself in the shoes of the customer. Why not put yourselves in the shoes of your employees, your engineers that are kind of excited about what you're building and really are aligned with that vision. And that's the reason they're on there, right? I mean, people don't join startups because of money or stock or other things. They join startups because of passion. And that's the one thing we try to maintain at DocNexus.
Great. Yeah, I mean that's a great thought. Amazing. So, kind of moving ahead, would like to understand, what are some of the trends or developments, especially in the healthcare side of things that you're excited about. Could be AI domain or using any other tech, but something that you feel would change a lot in the healthcare domain.
Yeah, I would say I mean, from the healthcare domain, I mean, there's a lot of things, right? I mean, we've seen tools emerge I would say like I'm very interested on how AI is going to help support not only like life sciences ecosystem and medical devices, but also help support physicians and like actual healthcare providers that are providing care to folks across the ecosystem, right? And so solutions like I'll give you an example, kind of talking through those three pieces, right? So today, DocNexus, we're basically a search engine for pharma and medical devices. Just like Google, you can come in, you can type in the name of a hospital system, a doctor, a drug, and you can figure out all the information about that person or any sort of those entities. From a physician side, or even from a healthcare perspective, I've seen tools that are emerging like Glass Health, right? And what it does is it basically helps diagnose patients, right? You can put in the symptoms, the treatment condition of or conditions of a patient, and it'll actually outcome what is the prescription pathway, and then what is the treatment pathway for that individual. And then moving further like into that, it's also how do you build, and this is an area that I'm really excited about, and I think this is where the future is headed. How do you build predictive models that can have better impact on the patients long term, right? There's so many folks in the world that deal with chronic diseases. I mean, yourselves, everyone probably knows someone that's dealt with cancer, diabetes, heart disease. And those diseases are continuing to be prevalent across the world, right? And building predictive models, like let's say my grandmother gets sick and wasn't able to meet her appointment that day, right? How many times do doctors actually follow up and figure out what's going on with that patient? It's not that often, right? And so trying to figure out how can I know, like, is a patient in a green, yellow, red state? And what should I do? What is that next best action that I should be taking on the patient's behalf? And I think this is where AI is going to continue to shine, continue to really help improve that patient outcome experience. And that's probably what I'm excited about most for the future.
Great. Yeah, and I think the predictive, I mean, that's really an interesting thought where if we are able to go to that level where we can predict some of these things before they're happening, maybe just based on the symptoms or the patient behavior, I mean, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Exactly,
Awesome.
right? I think that's what's going to be very useful long term.
Yeah. So, would really love to know what are some of the goals or milestones that you have kind of set for yourself and DocNexus in for coming years.
Yeah, I would say like, right, I mean, the goal for us, right, is it's a very, very overarching goal. And like, I mean, the mission of our company is to bring new life-saving products to market faster, right? We want to enable the next generation. We're not going to be the ones that are developing every piece of like cutting edge technology. There's so many smart people in this world that are developing things across India, Latin America, like Asia Pacific. They're bringing new cancer devices to market, or cancer products to market. They're bringing new medical devices to market. They're bringing new vaccines, just like we saw with COVID, to market. And I think we want to really help them succeed by helping them find who these key experts are long term. And so that's one thing that we're trying to build. How can we add further search capabilities? Not only search by person, or search by publication, or search by trial. How can you search by drug? How can you search by medical device? How can you search by hospital? Yes. So those are capabilities we're adding in from our perspective. And then long term, I think what we want to create, and this is a very, very like ambitious goal, we're trying to create a world where healthcare providers, doctors, nurses can actually talk to each other. They don't today. Most doctors and nurses use Twitter, right? And it's probably not. It's a great platform to use, but having meaningful discussions about what's going on in the world of like cutting edge trials or cutting edge publications is very difficult to do. And we want to bridge that world of healthcare providers with the world of industry, right? There's so many cutting edge startups, so many folks across pharma, so many folks across medical devices that want to engage. And so we're trying to create this two-sided marketplace where healthcare providers talk to each other, and then pharmaceutical organizations, if they want to contact a Deepak Bhatt or Sanjay Gupta, they can decide, okay, I want to go ahead and talk to him because he's an expert in myocardial infarction, or he's an expert in AFib. And so because of that, they can have those discussions, and really that's where innovation develops, right? Innovation isn't going to develop on its own. it's going to develop when healthcare providers are actively talking with these cutting edge organizations and co-developing products. And so we want to be that intermediary that makes all this possible.
Amazing, amazing. And how do you look? How are you looking forward to scaling up? Is it like geographically, or as you're saying, adding more search options to the product? Like how do you envision to scale up the oral product?
Yeah, so I mean, today obviously like scaling up happens with like more features and also like more customer conversations, right? And so I think we're trying to double down into like hiring more engineers, hiring more like sales folks across that side, and people that are really aligned with that vision of like building something that is not only going to impact right now and this moment of society, but it's going to impact generations to come, right? We want to impact the world by building out a solution that changes the global healthcare ecosystem as a whole. And that starts off with a basic search capability today, but then long term, it transforms itself into an ecosystem or a marketplace where these healthcare providers are talking with folks across the industry, right? And so that's how we see this in terms of scaling, right? And I think it comes back down to trusting your employees, and every employee that we have, like, and this is something that we even like judge. It's passion, right? It's the excitement they have about this ecosystem, whether it's a personal thing that they faced. They don't have to have that background coming in from spending tens of years in healthcare. Like I didn't, right? I came in from a background that was
Yep.
in engineering and PM to venture capital, and now kind of morphed into this role. I think people that are excited about where the world's headed and how healthcare and even how AI are going to have an impact are people that should contact me.
Awesome, awesome. So this was amazing, and I would say inspiring, especially as you rightly said, to founders who are keen to work in the health tech space, and uh, they probably they have an idea and they want to kind of create an impact, because I think healthcare is kind of a space where you directly impact on human lives in a way, right? So I think this was really good from that perspective. So thank you, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for joining us on Health Tech with Purpose. I think it was really good listening to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rishikesh, for having me on. And yeah, excited to be part of the podcast community.
Awesome.